My name is Richard Gibbs. I am a reformed rock musician, classically trained composer, film composer, and owner of this studio, Woodshed Recording here in Malibu. The funny thing is a lot of people think of me now as a studio owner, and that's not on my resume to me. I own a studio, but I'm not a studio owner. I built a studio for me. My background was, like I said, classical composition. I was a rock and roller who went to a jazz college, Berklee College of Music, and got a degree in classical composition. Moved here from Boston, originally from Florida, school in Boston, came out here, and started finding my way as a musician. My first professional gig was Shaka Khan's musical director when I was, I think, 24, 23. From there, I toured with Tom Jones. I did a short stint with him, and that led in a very funny way to being the keyboard player in the band Oingo Boingo. But all along, I was always working as a session player, and somebody found out about my background in composition and knew about a job that required a film composer, but they didn't want a credited film composer. They want somebody who thought about it more in terms of rock production. So that became my first job, scoring a movie called Sweetheart's Dance. That led indirectly to getting a job as a musical director for Tracy Ullman. She had a show called The Tracy Ullman Show on Fox. And while I was working on that, they spun off, they had a 1-minute short as part of the Tracy Ullman Show, animated short, which they spun off as its own show called The Simpsons. They hired Danny Elfman to write the theme, not knowing that Danny and I had this common history of Oingo Boingo. So Danny wrote the theme. I scored the first season of the show. Both of our careers were taking off as film composers, his gloriously so. And that's that part of the background. Somewhere along the line, every film composer needs a studio of some sort to work in because you work long hours and it's too expensive to rent studios, and we always want that pajama commute, So as my wife and I moved from house to house and things were going better, I had at one point had more money than sense and decided to build a proper recording studio, and hence this place. I wish I could say that I thought about it in those terms. I didn't. It was much more selfish than that. I designed it for me. I happen to be a musician. I am not an engineer. I'm smart enough to know there are much better people than me that are engineers for doing that. So I hire those guys to do what they do, and I do what I do. I'd also spent my life in recording studios all around the world, especially obviously LA. And the last thing in the world I wanted to do was to build a recording studio in my backyard. To me, that's like a doctor building an operating room in his backyard. I don't want that. I wanted it to feel personal to me. And the design of the studio was affected by some very specific things. In the city of Malibu, I couldn't go any bigger than the footprint of this place, which is decent sized. But I also needed to have all this flexibility for recording different types of ensembles, different sizes, different acoustic demands, and so on. So we came up with this design, which has, to my knowledge, never been done in a studio. All this gear is behind me here, which gets to the SSL here, is on wheels. All the stuff rolls, all right? And it can go anywhere in this big room that you want. And which, okay, big deal, so what? All the wiring is all modular and in triplicate underneath the floor, and it pops up in different places, hidden hatches everywhere. The reasoning for that is that there's a series of wall panels, which we'll show you, that come out, and you can form different rooms depending on what you're doing. So about a dozen configurations through this room. Right now it's set up as just one big open space. When I'm writing or any number of other things, we leave it like this. But when It depends on what we're recording. We completely change the configuration of the room. It's a pretty radical shift, acoustically, functionally, vibe-wise, everything. But again, I wasn't thinking in terms of sound. I was thinking in terms of, well, functionality in terms of the musician. Where do you want to sit? Where do you want to do? I mean, there's certain things we did here that you would never do in a recording studio. As I'm sure you can see, there's glass all the way around us. You don't do that. That's an acoustic nightmare. Everybody told me that. So I had to find a studio designer that was willing to help us accommodate my desire to have, we're looking down over the ocean here, looking out over the Pacific Ocean. I wasn't about to shut that off. I didn't just want a little picture window. I wanted the glory of the whole thing. So I wanted to be able to open up all these doors and windows and have an ocean breeze come in while I'm working. So that, of course, leads to acoustic anomalies, but we found other ways to compensate for it. I had some very creative people helping me design this place. I'm not a studio designer, once again, but I am smart enough to hire one, right? And I hired an architect who had never done a recording studio before. This whole place is craftsman architecture. He had never done a craftsman building before. He was a modern Chinese architect, Taiwanese. He designed cities in mainland China. But I hit it off with him personally. He loved the challenge of it. And we came up with this completely different design between he and I and the studio designer named Jack Vieira, who acted as a consultant. He didn't actually design anything architecturally other than he showed us how to decouple the floors and the walls and do all the things that you're supposed to do in a recording studio. But we hid all of that functionality everywhere we could. There's a lot of hidden secrets in this place. So there's a deck outside here, the ocean view deck, and down below that deck is the machine room. So all of the computers, a lot of the gear that you would typically see in the back wall of a studio is down there. Also down there are 2 more isolation booths. So the Leslie for the Hammond is down there, already mic'd up and ready to go. And there's also a Bogner speaker cabinet, mic'd up, ready to go. So a guitarist can come in, use one of our heads or bring his own Marshall or whatever he wants. He plugs it into the wall and it's already mic'd up and ready to go. And he can be at full volume. You cannot hear him at all until you open up the mics on the console. And then that way he hears what's truly being recorded. There's no bleed in the room whatsoever. He can also sit on the piano bench next to the piano player, do a duet, and you have total isolation because it's 30 feet away. Never intended to be commercial. I mean, I always thought, I wonder if anybody else would like this, And we were always open to the idea of it. My friend Ellis Sorkin owns an organization called Studio Referral Services. And Ellis had been here for the opening, we had a huge party when we opened the studio. I mean, a massive party. We had 4 bands and cops were called and the whole thing. And Ellis asked me, do you want to rent it out? And I said, yeah, if it comes up. He called me up and said, Eminem needs a studio for an hour to record Pink. So, and he needs a studio. She wants to stay local. At the time, she lived a mile away from here. So I said, great. So they rented the studio for an hour for Pink. Eminem himself wasn't here, just his engineer and Pink. Pink came in, saw the place, and immediately said, can we book the whole property? I've got a project going on. I need 2.5 weeks. It's been pretty much word of mouth ever since. So I don't think of it as a commercial studio in the sense that we don't put out ads. We don't, too much. We started to do that, but we haven't. We market. We actually will reach out to clients sometimes and say, hey, there's somebody that we just like musically and like their vibe and what they're about. Said, you might want to check this out. We'd love to invite you to come here. So that's the extent of our marketing. Our most consistent clients over the last 2 years, Chris Martin, he consistently says this is his favorite studio on the planet. maybe he says that to all the studios, I don't know. But we love him as a client. It's been so great having him here. He's done all the vocals for the last record here and a lot of the writing here. He just loves coming to hang sometimes, I think, you know. Barbra Streisand, her last 2 albums, which have both been duet albums. The last one was Encore, the one before that was Partners. She did most of the vocals here. And a lot of video promotion and stuff for both those albums were done here. The fun about that was because she was doing all these duets, other than having Barbara here, which was delightful enough, she would bring in people like Seth MacFarlane, Jamie Foxx, John Mayer. All these people would come here and do duets with her here. So that increased the number of signatures on the inside of the piano dramatically. It's a Disc Clavier Pro. It's all MIDI'd, and you know, I can, when I'm working on a film score, I will often use my sample, even though my real piano's right there, I'll use the samples for the piano parts just to work out what I want to do. And a lot of times I will literally tell my engineer, say, okay, record me now, I'm going surfing. And he'll just send the MIDI from that over to that piano. And then he can tweak it, fix any little mistakes I made, and really get it mic'd. I have no patience for that. Again, I'm not an engineer. So that's the beauty of having that kind of piano. And somewhere along the line, I thought, oh, it'd be fun to have people sign it that were working here. And I was doing, I did a movie called Queen of the Damned with Jonathan Davis from Korn. And he and I had written the songs and the score for that. And I was working with them producing MTV Unplugged, Korn on MTV Unplugged. And I don't know, somewhere along the line, I said, hey, John, why don't you sign my piano? That's okay. So he was the first signature, Jonathan Davis. And from there, every time somebody came in and said, hey, you want to sign the piano? And everybody has. The only requirement we have is that you work here to sign the piano. We don't just have people randomly sign it. So the piano has its own provenance to it, you know. At some point, I think when I'm ready to retire, I could probably retire off selling the piano, you know. None of them would forgive me that have signed it, you know. You'll know when I've just said, I'm out, when you see that piano up on eBay. It's like, okay, Richard's checking out, and he's done because I've lost all my friends at that point. The studio had become its own business, and I realized, well, I've got to get a console that people can just come in, see, oh, I know this, I can get to work. Every engineer worth his salt just looks at this and knows exactly what it is, knows what's going on with it. And I think the thing that really tipped me was I kept asking all of these people about people that were in here, engineers and producers that were in here. Every time somebody was in here, would say, you know, we're thinking of getting this or that. What do you think? And I love that beautiful English understatement of Rick Simpson from, Coldplay. And he says, when you think about the Matrix, he goes, it's a lovely piece of kit, that. It was like, so concise, and it's like, it has everything you want right there. And I said, okay, well, that sounds pretty good. SSL has, you guys have an office here. I can call somebody when something's up and they'll deal with it. So that tipped me a little bit too. And the more we looked at this console, even though it was, it's relatively small, it had every feature we needed. It had everything. It was almost as if it was custom built for this studio. And it enabled me to get rid of the summing mixer and the monitor system. And that was the thing I was worried about because I couldn't get any definitive answer as to what sounds better, what works better. And I looking around on all the message boards. Now I do sound like a gear geek. And I'm looking around all the message boards and asking people, well, how does it compare? And getting different answers to all this. And if I'm just going to go for it. Purchased it through Vintage King, and we wired it all up. And the second we turned it on, it's like, everything sounded better. It wasn't, I was worried that it would be okay, just in a different way, but the clarity, the headroom, everything, now it sounds like an ad for SSL, but it's the truth. I was very happily blown away with the difference in the sound. It's very kind of that classic, clean SSL sound that I like that, because that means if I want to add coloration, I can add it. But some other consoles have coloration, which is lovely, but you can't take it away. And when you're doing film score, that's not necessarily a good thing. I needed clean, open, big, and that's what this brought right away, even though it's just this little thing. Well, as I said, I'm a musician. I'm a composer. My background is not as an engineer. I spent my life in recording studios that were designed by acousticians and engineers for engineers and acousticians, not for the musicians necessarily. For the music, granted, but not the musicians. There's a difference, right? And because I designed this for me, for what made me feel good, for what I liked, the vibe I wanted. And I realized after the fact, I can't say it was by design up front, I realized after the fact that I made the engineers feel like I always felt as a musician going into an engineer space. I always felt a bit like a foreigner, like this is your realm. I'm a musician. I'm coming into your realm so you can capture my music. Now, in this space, I think the engineers, when they first come here, often are kind of, wait a minute, what do you mean the console moves? What do you mean the speakers can go in here? What do you mean the walls move? So they have to kind of rethink it a little bit. It's not uncomfortable, but it's different for them. The musicians always come in here and say, yes, this is what I like. And fortunately, the musicians are generally the ones who hire the space. So they're the ones who keep coming back because they like the vibe, just the feel of the studio itself. Besides the design of the room and the moving walls and all that, there are a lot of things that are unique to the studio in terms of instruments and stuff that are here. The 59 Hammond, a nice old Fender Rhodes, Celeste, it's a Balinese gamelan set. Stuff, percussion I've collected through the years, some interesting guitars, even though I'm not really a guitarist. So that all comes with the studio, and they tend to like that too. I've managed to find that I can surprise even the most worldly musicians. Like when U2 was here, one of my engineers pulled down this thing I have called a Marxophone that I could go grab it. You get a kick out of this thing. It was an instrument made in like 1911 that it's kind of like a poor man's hammered dulcimer, and you can pull down on this spring steel and it bounces against the strings, and you tune it and you play it like I don't know how to describe it, but you get the sound of a hammered dulcimer, but a child can play it. You don't have to have any special technique. And Edge was like, what is that? Like, that's what I like. That kind of, we ended up giving him one as a parting gift when they left here. So there's a lot of that kind of little surprises here too for people. And then of course there's an ocean view. And when they rent the whole property, we also have private beach rights, and that tends to draw people back too. And the organic gardens, and the kicker, for those who care, and most people do, I think, is that we have 99 solar panels on the roof of the residence. So this entire place is solar powered. You're recording me right now using the energy of the sun. So that's kind of nice. So